This is a phone I fondly remember from a time where I couldn't just have whatever phone I wanted. Back in 2016, I was turning 12 years old and my parents drove me down to the Verizon store and picked me out this, the Samsung Galaxy J3. This phone was pretty awful, but it did serve me well for a good 3 or 4 years. But this video isn't about the J3, it's about the phone I saw sitting right next to it near the flagship section, the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge. Now, this was a perfect way to get me obsessed about a piece of technology. I mean seriously, curved screen, OLED, apparently super fast performance. This thing is awesome. The screen had a super sleek looking edge, a great camera, and premium glass metal build. But at the price of almost $800, there's no way I was walking out of the store with it even if I had the money back then. But 6 years on, Android phones have depreciated a lot to the point where I found this one with a mild screen cracked for just $31 on eBay. And for that price, I don't think you can find anything that so greatly feels like something much more expensive. Picking this thing up for the first time literally felt like an experience, which might sound corny, but keep in mind that I've been used to cheap plastic phones from the low and mid-range section for the last, well, my entire existence of owning phones. My first one was made of plastic, of course, and the Pixel 4a was also made of plastic. In comparison, the S7 Edge felt like it meant business, with a confident grip in your hand, and of course that gorgeous edge feel. Inside, it's much more capable than my J3 could ever imagine, with a powerful Snapdragon 820 chipset powered by 4GB of RAM and 32GB of onboard storage starting out. On a stock Android Marshmallow install, it was pretty fast, but with the last official update it got on Android Oreo, to be honest, it's kind of lacking today. Multitasking is finicky and difficult, which I know isn't a RAM problem because the other devices I have with 4GB of RAM, like the iPad mini I'm using as a teleprompter, can do these things just fine. Touch whiz boxes down as usual. The good news is though, the Samsung community of course sold millions of these phones, which means that you can find custom ROMs and firmwares for these phones all over the place. Lineage OS is a great way of getting a modern version of Android that not only looks great, runs fast, but also provides your phone with modern security updates, which this phone hasn't gotten in about 4 years. Running games is possible, but needless to say, newer titles like Genshin Impact for example, only run about 15 to 20 FPS on the SoC. The 2D titles that were popular back then, like Candy Crush and Line Racer and all those other types of games, run perfectly fine on the phone. And the older 3D games that came out back then, like Smash Hit and Fruit Ninja, worked just fine. But like, this chipset in particular was not exactly peak Snapdragon. The 820 was famous for having overheating issues and poor performance compared to the Exynos variant you could get this phone in internationally. And unfortunately, this is the one with the Snapdragon in it. Compared to having the same specs otherwise, this phone could barely keep more than 2 apps open. If you see the side-by-side speed test that people ran on this, you can see that the Exynos performs way better. Additionally, this phone gets hot, like really hot. Especially when you're doing anything intensive like using navigation or playing 3D games. This was the first phone to use a vapor chamber, relying on liquid cooling to keep the phone cool, which it definitely needs because I think if it had anything even less than that, it would probably just burn itself out immediately. And the poor thing is that even with the vapor changer and everything that they engineered into this phone still overheats to the moon and back. I mean, compare this to the next flagship CPU that Snapdragon released, 835. On Moto Z2 Force, Genshin Impact runs at 30 FPS at an HD resolution easily, and while it does get hot, it's not egregiously so. The other major downside was battery life. Now to be clear, apparently brand new, the S7 Edge lasted over 11 hours on a single charge. But the thing is that this unit is definitely not brand new, and I found myself barely getting through a full days of usage, even if I tried to use it as lightly as possible with the battery saver mode on. Additionally, the micro USB port and lack of really good fast charging makes a very poor battery experience in general. And while it does have wireless charging, it's so slow that I wouldn't even consider using it unless I absolutely had to. And what's also slow on this phone is the home button that also doubles as a fingerprint reader. I find it kind of funny today we complain about fingerprint readers even taking a split second more to unlock the phone versus the competition, but even just 5 years ago, this is what we were dealing with. But enough complaining about what's bad about this phone, because there's plenty that's great about it. One of the main selling points was the camera system on this phone, which consists of a single 12-megapixel camera on the back. This might sound kind of lacking today, but keep in mind, the single shooters are still very popular. The Pixel 4a that came out in 2020 was famous for having a great 12-megapixel shooter, and this Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge is 4 years older and is no exception to greatness. It was rocking a night mode way before the iPhone 7 was, and shoots some pretty solid 4K video even today. The photos that come out of this thing are sharp, colorful, and still look great. The only real downside is that, of course, being a single lens, there's no wide angle, there's no telephoto, so you're basically stuck with this focal length. But if you're the kind of person who only does casual shooting, then I can imagine you get some mileage out of this phone even today. To be honest though, the front-facing camera is about exactly what you'd expect. It's 5 megapixels and pretty undetailed, but perfectly fine for the average selfie, I guess. A cool feature Samsung included along the camera array though is this new heart rate monitor sensor. This literally is like the same kind of thing that they use in hospitals, using the red LED to sense your heart rate. And it's something that you don't see in actual phones today. The main reason for this is because obviously the sport watches of the world have taken over that role. But it's still kind of cool that this phone has it because it just reminds us of a time when we didn't quite know how to consolidate all the features into separate devices. Now, one of the main reasons to buy an old Samsung is this, the screen. Samsung has been known for putting great screens into their phones for years, and the S7 Edge is absolutely no exception. With this beautiful curved edge, which to be fair has grown a bit old, and its OLED technology, it's still a great performer in 2022. The blacks are deep and colors are saturated, and while it might not go edge to edge and everything, for watching 16:9 content, it still looks absolutely amazing. The only thing it's lacking, of course, is 120 Hz, having LTPO technology, and maybe, being a bit brighter. But for what it is, it's still solid. It rocks many of the older LCD phones you'll find on the market. The Edge is also a feature that Samsung was marketing heavily, starting with the S6 Edge back in 2015. However, the S7 actually had a bigger screen than the S6 did, having a 5.5 inch rather than a 5-inch screen. And with this, you could just set the phone on its face, and if you got a notification, it would light up the screen a bit. Additionally, if you're looking at the phone from a bit of an angle from above, you could kind of just you could kind of almost read your notifications. I mean, it looks kind of dinky today, but it'll look cool in the advertisement, I guess. And one thing that people don't often consider about having a curved edge phone is that it saves width on the phone, which improves handling. For example, on my Moto Z2 Force and my S7 Edge, these have the same size screen, which is 5.5 inches. But you'll notice that the S7 Edge is just slightly narrower than the Moto Z2 Force is. It might not sound that significant, but it plays a large role in the handleability of any given phone. Notice how I can almost close my thumbs on this phone, while on this phone they're still quite far apart. And it makes this phone really just much easier to grip rather than this phone. But the only downside of having an OLED screen is that, well, OLEDs burn in. I swear almost all the cheap units I saw on eBay all had completely burnt in screens, and replacing them is way too expensive to justify for most people. Therefore, those phones just kind of turn into e-waste. But if you can find deals like I did, with my unit only having a barely noticeable hairline crack, I mean, can you guys even see that? I'm not sure if you guys can. But in this display, being in mint condition otherwise, which it got shipped to my house for under 40 bucks, needless to say, there's not a whole lot of $31 phones out there that beat this one. I mean, you can't even make a phone for $30 anymore with the whole chip shortage thing, and it's actually pretty great because the used market is blowing up now. All these older phones are getting a new chance at life. Additionally, people are realizing they don't quite need the latest and greatest anymore. Because the truth is, the phones have been pretty great for a good while now. I mean, seriously, an iPhone 7 doesn't get iOS 16, but it's still plenty fast on iOS 15. Completely usable in 2022. And if you take the time to install custom ROMs with this thing, then you can get a whole lot more mileage out of this thing than it may be otherwise. And really, with mid-range phones being so good these days, if you can get an old flagship instead for the same price, I don't know why you wouldn't, because you're getting everything that was great about the previous year, but not cheaply built. The only thing is that if you're going to pick up an S7, I really recommend finding an international Exynos variant, because this Snapdragon is just not up to today's standards. And I even know if someone in school still has an S7, and I'm guessing she originally bought it all those years ago, and is still using that phone to this day. And I'll say that's quite a value proposition if you spent less than $1,000 on a phone back in 2016, considering that a flagship these days will run you over $1,200. And I can't remember who said this, but it's a piece of advice that's always stuck with me the second I heard it. But it's basically like, if you're still doing the same kind of things that you're doing with your phone or laptop or computer or whatever that you were doing in the past, then there's a good chance that your phone will still be able to do those things just fine today, and you won't really need to upgrade. And to be honest, I stick to that kind of advice. I mean, for a moment, I was daily driving my Motorola Z2 Force. This is a phone that's 5 years old at this point, but it still served me pretty well. Because to be honest, I don't really do a whole lot of processor intensive things that use up all the RAM and do crazy multitasking. In fact, the only reason I got the new Google Pixel was because it needed a better camera system. I found myself always zooming in onto shots and always getting blurry results. Having a telephoto lens really does make a difference for the people who will use it. But if you're not the kind of person who will use it, then I couldn't really justify to you why you should buy a new phone. And the thing is that all this upgrade culture that happens in the late 2010s and the early 2020s is becoming kind of toxic in my opinion. Because the thing is, people used to hold on to their phones for several years. Not upgrading your phone every 1 to 2.5 years, it actually makes the phone more personal to you. I mean, seriously, just consider that all the games you might have installed on this thing back in 2016, back when I was 11, 12 years old, it'd become very personal to me because I did that. All the photos I have on here would be on the phone itself, not on Google Photos and everything. And all my saved contacts would be the ones that I originally put on here and manually typed into the phone. I know it's easy enough to just connect the cable and make sure your new phone is basically exactly like your old one, but there's something personal about keeping a phone around for this long. There's just a sense of having your phone with you all the time. And if there's ever an internet outage, having all that stuff with you is just really nice. And I guess that kind of brings me back to this phone, my Samsung Galaxy J3 that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. It's a slow piece of crap like it was when I first got it, but it served me fundamentally as a phone and got me out of plenty of emergencies. I just found myself unable to grow attachment to it because it gave me no reason to. It wasn't made to be anything other special except for cheap. And although it might not, feels like it was kind of just like forced to exist. And while it might not mind existing right now, I feel like in its current state, it'd rather just be kind of put out of its misery. But by contrast, the S7 Edge wants to stand out and wants to make you appreciate it. It was expensive back then and it's made completely of glass. You sort of had to hold it delicately because if you dropped it, it would completely shatter. But if you were nice to it, then it was nice to you back. It served you as a completely good device that stayed pretty and fresh for years to come. This phone gives you an eye to shoot your life's moments without putting a haze filter on top, and a window that can show you the deepest tones and the richest contrasts of a movie. It gives back the care you show it, and that's what at least makes me really appreciate this phone. But with that, this is the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge, the phone I always wanted to own and, well, finally do. And this is Carlskee, out.